Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful that you've decided to join me for what I hope will be an interesting discussion today. The other day, I was listening to a podcast called Drive Thru FM, which is hosted by Eddy, who also has a YouTube channel called Drive Thru Games. Now, if you're at all into board games or miniature wargaming or minis painting or just good human beings, I highly recommend subscribing to Drive Thru Games on YouTube and Drive Thru FM on your podcast device. I think you would really enjoy Joel's stuff. But he had a discussion that I found to be very interesting the other day on his podcast about why humans play board games. It inspired me to think about that topic and to add my own kind of 2 cents into the mix. And I'm really hoping it's going to prompt some discussion from you as well, that in the comments below you'll add your ideas. I hope you find the discussion to be thought-provoking and not too pretentious. Why do we play games? 'Cause they're fun. Anyways, let's get into it. So before I get into my thoughts, I highly recommend you go over to Joel's video and check out what he had to say first. I'll have the link to the video below, and I'll have the timestamp for when the discussion starts. And once you have seen what Joel has to say, then you can come back here and I can expand on some of those ideas. So just to summarize the ideas that Joel was presenting in his podcast, I had 4 main points that I took away from what Joel had to say. I printed them out in 24-point font so that I could read them without my glasses, and I still couldn't read them, so I printed them again in 34-point font, and I think I can actually make them out now. So anyways, point number 1 that Joel made is that a game is several things at once. It is a puzzle to solve. It's a way to examine the systems within systems of the real world. It's a storytelling device. It's a blueprint for extracting happiness. And similarly, it's a construct or system of shared contentment. The second point that Joel makes is that they allow us to briefly short-circuit our daily routines of manufacturing widgets for the machine and override our baseline existential despair to find some moments of happiness and contentment. The third point is we play games to look at real-world events in a more abstract level and engage with them in a different way, and to take a little excursion into a language of organized leisure communication, and to just find some contentment for a while after making sure our basic needs in life are met, because otherwise, what the hell is the point? And then the final point here is there is also a certain amount of ceremony, ritual, and exercise involved in playing games. So I hope I've done okay with summarizing Joel's ideas. And so that was the starting point, and I certainly agree with these things that Joel has laid out. And I would only just expand on them with 1 or 2 other ideas too. Now, I haven't studied this topic at all, haven't read up on it, haven't discussed it with other people, so I'm really just kind of talking out my arse here. But these are the ideas that come to mind as I think through the question of why do humans play games. And to start off with, I go all the way back to the basics, to our evolutionary instincts, and I do so because we live in such a crazy time in humanity. For the vast majority of human history, we were small communities of migratory hunter-gatherers, and that was the way that we lived for tens of thousands of years. And it wasn't until quite recently in history that we discovered farming, we settled down and created city-states, and then nation-states, and then civilizations, and sort of blew up into what we are now in this highly isolated lifestyle that we live in terms of physical human contact, not all this social media fluff that is taken for interaction. But nowadays, the size of our community is basically the size of our house that we shut ourselves in. And we've gone from being these highly physical people who live strenuous lives of chasing after game and just finding food to extremely sedentary and passive lives. So this moment we're living now in history is so strange in comparison to the vast majority of history. So when I look at humanity in terms of the majority of its history, I wonder, what did we do for entertainment and play? We can't really know that for certain because of how far back in history it goes, but we can get clues, I think, if we look at nature and we look at other animals. So if you look at cats, for instance, when you see kittens at play, they chase each other and stalk each other and pounce and wrestle. And what they're doing is they are practicing adult skills, but without the repercussions and dangers inherent in being a hunter-predator. So a kitten at play is enhancing the skills that it will need to survive in the world. And so if I kind of transpose that into modern life, where instead of being kind of out there running after our food and living highly active lives, we're sitting in offices and using our mental processes, and while being very sedentary, we're doing a lot of kind of mental work. And so I wonder if our play in terms of games represents that sitting around doing mental work, coming up with long-term strategies, or dealing in the moment with tactics that are ever changing and shifting. And if that kind of mental exercise translates to our real life in terms of using our brain and facing these sort of mental challenges, I don't know, maybe there is a correlation in that if we were still hunter-gatherers, if our play would consist of maybe running and chasing after each other and wrestling and doing these much more active physical activities with each other. On the flip side, I think our very cerebral, non-physical work environments are also why just static entertainment is so appealing to us. Just being able to shut off our brain in front of the television and not have to think about stuff or work through stuff on a mental level, because that's what we largely do all day at work. Now, I'm talking in general terms, obviously. There are very physical jobs out there. I had a unique job as a paramedic in that it was highly physical on one hand, because, I mean, you take a 200-pound adult, put them on an 80-pound stretcher, and then carry them up or down some flights of stairs. That is very physical work, and my back is wrecked to this day because of it. On the flip side, being an advanced care paramedic was also a very mentally taxing job too. Having to assess somebody who had a medical problem and work through that at a medical level was a very challenging mental exercise at times. So my job was interesting in that it had both the physical and mental sides of things, but I'm sort of talking in general about our everyday office type of work environment and how the mental exercise of gaming might enhance that. I mean, I can see how it would be good for our brains to participate in board gaming, and at the same time, it's a social activity, so we are having to deal with other humans, perhaps in conflict if we're playing a competitive game rather than a cooperative game. On the other hand, we might be playing a cooperative game, and we do have to learn how to cooperate with the people around us to come up with strategies to deal with the puzzle that's been presented to us. So again, this type of in-person human interaction is something that is going to carry forward into our real world and be of benefit to us if we can learn to interact with people both on a competitive and a cooperative level. That's going to have some real benefits in real life, I believe, especially if we're getting our children into gaming and getting them to process all these things, as well as to learn how to be a good winner and a good loser and all the other things that sort of come along with participating in board gaming. You'll notice that some of these things I'm talking about are specific to board gaming instead of video gaming, in terms of that in-person connection, that sitting around a table with real live humans, and that in-the-moment, real-time communication that's happening. So just from a deep evolutionary standpoint, it got me thinking that maybe there's a connection between board gaming and the skills we take into our everyday work and life environments. Now, that's a big picture overview. If I'm looking at just myself as an individual, I've always said that I love board gaming because it allows me to sit around a table with real humans and without screens, and to actively participate in creating a shared narrative with these other people. As we play a game, a story is being created in a sense, and this goes all the way from being a very literal story, if you're playing something like a role-playing game where you are creating a shared narrative together, all the way down to a more abstract board game where maybe you're facing some kind of real-world problems that the game is presenting and you're having to sort through it. But in the process, you are still telling some kind of story as things unfold. And I do also appreciate the mental exercise that board gaming provides. Again, the long-term strategies, the short-term ever-changing tactical situations, and the puzzle that's presented to us as Joel has described it. That is all an interesting mental exercise too, as opposed to a passive form of entertainment where you're just sitting there absorbing what's coming through a screen typically. But that aspect of it, I think, is less important for me than the narrative aspect of it, which is why in my personal tastes, I lean towards heavily thematic games, sort of the Ameritrash style games, as opposed to the heavy Euro style games, which are much more cerebral, a lot more abstract in their themes typically. At the end of the day, I like to tell that story. I like to be able to say, oh, you remember that time when my character, when it was almost dead, but I killed that goblin and we got through and succeeded at our mission, as opposed to, hey, you remember when I converted my yellow cube into a blue cube and I got all those points? It's not quite the same from a storytelling sense, and that, again, that's why I lean towards the thematic games in general. And Joel does emphasize this kind of language of gaming, this way to communicate with each other within the confines of the rules of a game. And at the end of the day, it is fun. It is a pleasurable experience and a fun way to pass time. I got to wondering, actually, if modern day humans have more or less free time than we did as ancient hunter-gatherers, whether in those olden times, if all of their time would be taken up just in the pursuit of food and shelter and meeting basic needs, or whether in times of plenty, perhaps, when it was easier to get food, they would have a lot of time to sit around as a community and interact with each other on a more leisurely level. But I don't know. I guess my main points were kind of bringing in the very basic evolutionary elements of it, as well as just my own personal viewpoint and experiences with the hobby. Beyond that, I think Joel has done a great job with covering all the other points that I would tend to mention. And so that takes me to you. I have two questions for you. One, why do you think humans play board games in general? Or if your experience isn't as much as board games, just gaming in general, what it is that appeals to humans about gaming. And secondly, why do you participate in gaming? Why are you a gamer? Please do comment below and carry on the discussion, because I'm very curious to hear more about it. All right, thanks for listening to me pontificate, and get out there and play some games and have some fun. Hey, it's Josh. You know why I'm here. Sometimes you just need that friendly reminder to give a little thumb up, to subscribe to the channel, to share the video with somebody who would enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers. Hi, I'm Josh, and I hope you find the discussion to be X is an interactive type of activity. Well, the mental challenge of that, and that